From chains to the call of freedom, man, when you really start digging into history, you come across these stories that just stop you dead in your tracks. They're not just about people who lived centuries ago, they're about human beings who embody resilience, conviction, and the kind of courage we can barely wrap our minds around today. And one of the stories that absolutely blows my mind every time is the story of Hazrat Bilal ibn Rabah. For Muslims, his name carries this massive weight of respect, but even if you're not Muslim, even if you're just looking at this from a human standpoint, the man's life is one of the most inspiring examples of endurance and unshakable faith you'll ever hear. The harsh reality of his beginning. So let's rewind the clock. Picture Arabia, 7th century. The desert is merciless, blazing sun by day, freezing winds at night. Society back then was tribal, divided, and hierarchical to the core, and at the very bottom of that system, slaves. Bilal was born into that. His father was a slave. His mother, Hamama, had once been a princess from Abyssinia but had been captured and forced into slavery. So from the moment he came into the world, Bilal's destiny in the eyes of his society was already written. Chains, servitude, humiliation. And slavery back then wasn't some mild thing. It wasn't like you work long hours for little pay. No, it was brutal. You were property. You had no rights. You were beaten, tortured, bought, and sold like cattle. You had no identity except the one your master allowed you to have. Now imagine Bilal, a tall, strong man, known for his striking presence and most famously his powerful voice. He had all this potential as a human being, but none of it mattered, because the system crushed people like him before they could ever rise. The message that shook the world, and then came a message that flipped everything upside down. Prophet Muhammad ﷺ began calling people to Islam, to worship one God, Allah, and to abandon the worship of idols. Now here's what's wild about that. It wasn't just a spiritual call, it was social dynamite. This new faith said that all human beings are equal in the eyes of God. Think about how radical that was in a world built on class, tribe, and hierarchy. The Quraysh, the ruling elite of Mecca, thrived on power, pride, and exploiting the weak. Suddenly, here's this message saying no, the slave and the master are the same before God. For a man like Bilal, can you imagine what that felt like? His whole life he had been treated as less than human, and then he hears about a God who sees him as equal, valuable. That's not just religion, man. That's liberation. That's freedom before freedom even existed. So Bilal believed. He said yes. He accepted Islam, and that single decision set the stage for one of the most incredible journeys of faith in human history. The fire of persecution. But here's where it gets brutal. Bilal's master was Umayyah ibn Khalaf, one of the fiercest enemies of Islam. And when he found out Bilal had accepted this new faith, he lost. He decided to make Bilal an example, to torture him so mercilessly that anyone else who thought about becoming Muslim would think twice. So what did he do? He dragged Bilal out into the scorching desert, stripped him down, tied him onto burning sand, and placed massive stones on his chest. Can you imagine that? The sun blazing down at 120 degrees, the sand burning your skin, a rock crushing your chest so you can barely breathe. And while you're there, your torturers are yelling at you, reject Muhammad. Worship our idols. Most people would break, anyone would. But Bilal, he didn't. The only word that came from his lips was Ahid, Ahid. One. That was his declaration. There is only one God. And he kept saying it, over and over, no matter how much they beat him, no matter how much they tried to silence him, that word kept coming out, Ahid, Ahid. Think about how insane that is. Most of us crumble under the smallest social pressure. Someone makes fun of us for what we believe, and we start second-guessing ourselves. This guy was literally being tortured to death, and all he could say was, one God. That's not just belief, that's unshakable conviction. That's faith forged in fire, the rescue. Now here's where the story takes a turn. One of the closest companions of the Prophet, Abu Bakr, saw what was happening. He couldn't stand it. He walked up to Umayyah and said, basically, enough, I'll buy him. And Umayyah, greedy for money, sold Bilal for a price. Just like that, Bilal was free. But let's pause here. That moment wasn't just the freeing of a slave. It was symbolic. It was Islam putting its money where its mouth is. It wasn't just preaching equality. It was practicing it. A man once treated as worthless property was now free, dignified, and honored. From slave to voice of Islam. But here's the part that gives me chills. After Bilal was freed, Prophet Muhammad didn't just see him as another believer. He saw his unique gift. He saw that strength, that resilience, that powerful voice. And when the time came to establish the call to prayer, the adhan, the Prophet chose Bilal to be the first muazzin in Islam. Let that sink in. The same voice that had once cried out, Ahid, Ahid, under torture, was now chosen to cry out, Allah Akbar, to summon believers to prayer. Man, that's poetry. That's redemption. That's turning pain into purpose. Imagine standing in Medina, hearing Bilal's voice echoing across the city. It wasn't just sound, it was history. It was defiance transformed into worship. It was a slave's cry becoming a call to unity. Why Bilal's story still matters. And here's the thing, man. This isn't just a Muslim story. This is a human story. It's about endurance, dignity, and the belief that no matter how low society places you, your worth is defined by something higher. Hazrat Bilal went from being whipped and chained in the desert to becoming one of the most honored figures in Islamic history. And his legacy isn't just in books, it lives on. Every time a muazzin calls the adhan today, that tradition began with Bilal. His voice echoes through time, through centuries, through millions of lives. Loyalty, legacy, and the voice that never died. You know, man, when we look at people who changed history, we often think of kings, generals, or politicians. But sometimes the most powerful legacy is left by someone who just held on to truth, who never let go no matter what. And Hazrat Bilal is one of those people, the voice of Islam. After being freed, Bilal wasn't just some ordinary companion of Prophet Muhammad. He became the voice of Islam. Every time Muslims were called to prayer, it was Bilal's voice echoing across Medina. And this is huge, because think about what prayer means in Islam. It's the daily connection between a person and God 5 times a day. And the first voice to ever make that call, the first human being chosen to invite others into that moment, was Bilal. Man, that's incredible. The world could have picked anyone. The Prophet could have picked anyone. But he picked Bilal, the former slave, the man society tried to bury, the man who once lay on the sand, tortured, whispering, Ahad, Ahad. And now, his voice was no longer in chains. His voice was flying, lifting hearts, reminding people of God, closeness to the Prophet. Bilal wasn't just the muazzin, he was also one of the Prophet's closest companions. He was by his side in battles, in journeys, in moments of triumph, and in moments of grief. He wasn't just a follower, he was family. There's a story that whenever the Prophet woke up for the pre-dawn prayer, Bilal was there. Whenever the Prophet needed to rally the believers, Bilal was there. And in battles he fought with courage, standing shoulder to shoulder with those who had once been leaders and masters, proving that equality in Islam wasn't just talk, it was real. And you can just imagine the bond between them. Bilal wasn't just someone doing a job, he was someone whose heart beat in sync with the message of Islam. The day everything changed, but here's the part that really hits hard. When Prophet Muhammad passed away, Bilal was shattered. Imagine losing not just your leader, not just your friend, but the man who had freed you from darkness, the man who gave your life meaning, the man who trusted you with the most important call in the world. The day after the Prophet's death, Bilal tried to give the adhan. He stepped up, started calling out, Allah Akbar, Allah Akbar. But when he reached the words, Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulallah, I bear witness that Muhammad is the messenger of Allah, his voice broke. He couldn't continue, he broke down weeping, his heart too heavy to even say the words. And the entire city of Medina cried with him. They weren't just hearing Bilal's voice, they were hearing the echo of their loss, the reminder that the messenger. From that day forward, Bilal couldn't bear to give the adhan in Medina anymore. The pain was just too raw. A new chapter, So what did he do? Bilal left Medina. He joined the Muslim armies as they expanded into new lands, carrying Islam beyond Arabia. Some narrations say he went to Syria, living a quiet but deeply spiritual life. Years later, during a journey, he returned to Medina, and when the people saw him, they begged him, "Bilal, please give the adhan again, just once." And he did. He stood there and called out the words he had once called countless times, but this time everyone listening broke down, because his voice carried the memory of the Prophet ﷺ. The city wept, grown men sobbing like children, their hearts cracked open by the sound of that familiar voice. Man, can you imagine that? It's like hearing the song of your childhood, after decades, but 10 times deeper, because it wasn't just a song, it was faith, it was love, it was memory. The passing of a legend. Hazrat Bilal eventually passed away in Syria, far from the desert, where he had once been tortured, but by then he was no longer the slave of Umayyah. He was no longer chained. He was immortal in history, immortal in the hearts of Muslims forever. He had lived his life as a symbol of loyalty, courage, and conviction. And when he left this world, he left behind a legacy that's alive every single day. Because to this day, 5 times a day, in every corner of the Muslim world, the adhan is called, and every time it is, it traces back to Bilal. What we can learn today. Now here's the part that I think really connects to us in the modern world. Bilal's story isn't just about history, it's about resilience. It's about identity. It's about never letting anyone define your worth. This guy went from being literally at the bottom of society, a slave, tortured, humiliated, to being remembered as one of the greatest voices in history. He proved that your value isn't set by your status, your money, or your background. It's set by your integrity, your conviction, your faith. And honestly, man, in today's world where people crumble over social media comments, where people lose themselves trying to fit into whatever the trend is, Bilal's story is a gut check. It's a reminder that if you know who you are, if you stand firm in your beliefs, nothing can break you. He was a living proof of Islam's message, that no one is superior to another except in piety, that dignity belongs to every human being, that faith can turn the weakest into the strongest. And here's the wild thing, more than 1400 years later, his story still gives us chills. His voice is gone, but the call he started still rings. Every mosque, every adhan, every prayer called, it's all an echo of Bilal's courage. That's immortality, man. Not fame, not fortune. Immortality through faith, through character, through living a life that means something. And Hazrat Bilal, the slave who became free, the tortured man who became the caller to prayer, the broken heart who couldn't say the Prophet's name without tears. He left a legacy that no empire, no ruler, no army could ever erase.